Welcome everybody back into NerdSesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And folks, if you can believe it or not, we are starting our NBA season preview content today. We've got all this great NFL stuff going on, so we got to spread out the NBA content before the season gets started, and I am already disgustingly excited for that NBA start date just about a month out. Today, we're going to be breaking down the Atlantic Division, and that, of course, starts, Logan, with the reigning NBA champion, Boston Celtics. How well equipped do you feel like this Boston team is to build upon what they did last year and maybe repeat as champs?
At this point, obviously the season hasn't started. I mean, I'd be surprised if the Celtics didn't win the championship again. I mean, they just have an embarrassment of riches here in Boston, and they decimated everybody in the playoffs. This was a dominant team last year. They won 64 games. They were number one in offensive rating and net rating. They were the number two defense in terms of net rating. And just in looking at the playoff run, they had the tied sixth best net rating in a playoff run by a champion since 2000. So, I mean, this is one of the best champions in this century. And when I think you look at the variables in their playoff run and what went wrong, I think it's a very replicable formula. I mean, Jayson Tatum couldn't make a jump shot in the NBA Finals, and it really didn't matter whatsoever. Now, I don't think the Dallas Mavericks were the best team in the West last season. I still think it was Denver, right? I think that maybe that would have come back to bite them against a better opponent, and I don't want to take anything away from the Mavericks for getting to the finals. It was very impressive that they were able to do so, but I think Minnesota would have been a little bit more well-equipped to slow down Boston offensively, and I think Denver probably would have been a better opponent in terms of matching them consistently night to night on the offensive end. But again, Jayson Tatum, this team's best player in my opinion, didn't have a great finals run, and it didn't really matter. This team still has an all-star starting five at full health. My only concern with this team, and really whether they're going to be my favorite or not, is when it comes playoff time, if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy and available. It's going to be really hard for me to pick any other team not named the Celtics to dethrone them if that's the case. If they are at full strength, if they are fully healthy, I'm definitely going to pick this team to repeat as champions again this year.
It's a bit surprising to me, Logan, that you say that you would be surprised if they didn't win it, just because I think that the league as a whole is much stronger this year. You look at OKC out west, they got significantly better. Some of the strongest competition out east, all of the strongest competition, really. Philly, New York, who we're going to talk about today, Milwaukee, all of those teams got better. So for those reasons, I do think that Boston doesn't have nearly the same margin it did last year when like some of the key components for them could go wrong and they were still just that much more talented than the field that they were able to come through. But I do still think that they're very well positioned to defend their title, and they are on paper the presumptive favorite. I just don't think it's necessarily by a massive margin. But they're in for great things again. I don't think this will be as dominant a regular season, though, for a couple reasons. Last year was incredible. They were a 64-win team. They were top 5 all-time in terms of net rating in the regular season. But this year, you're dealing with the Porzingis injury. He'll be out for the first 1 to 2 months, and realistically, at some point down the stretch will probably get banged up again. So you're going to miss him for a more significant portion of the season. And also, I do think that championship malaise is just a very inherent thing for teams that are trying to run it back. You have to respect the quote from Joe Mazzulla that defending champions, that's a very passive phrase. We got to go out there and attack. That's cool. That's good stuff. Maybe that does mean that they will be foot on the gas, but I just think it's natural to expect a little bit of a drop off from teams. They just aren't as motivated to prove everybody in the world wrong when they've already climbed the mountain. That being said, this team retains every key piece. They still have 5 top 50-ish players when they're at full strength. They have the most aggregate shot creation and shooting in the league. All of this perimeter skill, it's just overwhelming. They have an elite defense with extremely versatile personnel. Those are all things that made them the champions last year. And I do think that their depth is better. Lonnie Walker is a good addition, in my opinion. 38% three-point shooter, good athlete, 6'10 wingspan. He's inconsistent on both sides of the ball. His defensive engagement is where you'd really like to see, can Boston make the most out of him? Because that could make him more of a solid, consistent rotation guy. But at the very least, like, you've added a dude who is more talented than the minimum contract that you've given him. That's a good pickup. Baylor Shireman, who they add in the draft, is a dude who can play right away. He's 23. He's an absurd shooter of the basketball. He was a 98th percentile pick and roll creator in college. He's got really good feel, good size as a playmaker too. He's an awesome rebounder positionally. And although he's not the best athlete, he's a capable defender, very sound positionally, high effort, just like a perfect fit for the Celtics' identity, an immediate high floor impact, versatile offensive guy. I think he should be able to play this year. So the bench was really one of the major questions about this team throughout the regular season, and it ended up being that the bench played pretty well, and also, like, Boston's starting five was just that much better than everybody else that they got the job done. But I do feel better about the bench. So this team is just going to be an absolute powerhouse. There's no question about that. Logan, there's been a lot of discourse about Jayson Tatum throughout the offseason because even though the Celtics won the title, he was not given Finals MVP. He wasn't even given Eastern Conference Finals MVP. You mentioned some of the shooting and scoring issues that he had. What's your outlook on him as a player? What are your expectations for him this season? And what do you think he needs to do to earn that more universal respect?
Hit a jumper. I mean, just hit a jumper.
Real.
Like, I think the discourse has gotten really out of hand with Jayson Tatum, and I hate being like the flag bearer or the guy that's always protecting Jayson Tatum in these conversations, but I feel like I
certainly
have
not a reputation you've historically had.
No, but I feel like I have to go to the bat. I have to go to bat for the guy just because of how far everyone else has, towed the line, how far we've gone in the other direction. Saying that Jaylen Brown is a better player, which I think on a game-to-game basis, sure, I think Jaylen Brown can outperform and outproduce Jayson Tatum in individual basketball games. But I think over a large sample size, an 82-game season, a playoff run, I think Jayson Tatum's just a better player. It sucks, man. He's so polarizing because you'll have these Boston Celtics fans that say he's the MVP of the league, he's the best player on the best team, so he's top 5, which I think is too far in that direction. Then you'll have the other people that say Jaylen Brown is the better player. This guy isn't top 10. He's not top 20. He's just not that kind of offensive player. And I'm somewhere in the middle of those two parties. That's where I am. But I just don't think he gets enough credit. I don't think Jayson Tatum is the scorer, the caliber of these elite guys that you see. SGA, Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid. I don't think Tatum's a scorer like that. I don't think he's a playmaker the like of a Jokic or a Luka. But I also don't think that Jayson Tatum's full value shows up in the box score. And that's what a lot of people base their opinions off of, with the prevalence of gambling and just not watching basketball, just basing it off of statistical performances. I don't think a lot of what Tatum does pops up. The way that he blows stuff up on the back end defensively, being in the right spot at the right time, making timely plays, being able to defend 1 through 5 on that end. And then offensively, creating initial pressures that create these easy swing 3 opportunities for the Celtics. It's just frustrating, man. I think that some people give Tatum too much credit. I think that some people don't give Tatum enough credit. I think Tatum's a top 10 player on the planet with all the things that he can do at a really high level. Getting to the rim, creating rim pressure, where he's gotten better, he's gotten stronger. He is a good jump shooter. I still believe that. I know that he's had his lull from the playoff run last year into the Olympics, and that is concerning, but I still think he's a high-level jump shooter. His post game has gotten so much better over the past year. I think he's improved as a ball handler and a playmaker. That was my biggest concern with Tatum in his game, dating back to the finals run against the Warriors where they lose. Tatum wasn't that level of ball handler and playmaker. He's made real strides there. He's one of the best defensive rebounders at his position and such a great defender. Like, he does so many things at such a high level. I think he has to be top 10. And it was an underwhelming scoring and playmaking run, but this team, the reality of the Boston Celtics is they're so talented they can withstand Jayson Tatum not being that level of scorer and playmaker. And so I still think he's a really great player, but I think that people want him to be this top 5 talent and are underwhelmed. And don't get me wrong, I'm underwhelmed in that respect. The reality is the Celtics just don't need him to play at that level to win basketball games. And I think that can be true again this year. Do I think he can be as bad as he was scoring the basketball in the finals and still win? Probably not. But can he have some off nights and they survive? Yes, wholeheartedly. The Boston Celtics are the most talented team still in basketball, in my opinion.
He does have to be better offensively, though, and especially as a scorer, because I appreciate you doing some Tatum defending. I've been doing that as well throughout the offseason, which is funny because last year I don't think that either of us were the biggest Tatum advocates, defenders throughout the regular season. But then, as you say, you just see things go too far in the negative direction because of people solely looking at the scoring and not appreciating all the other things he's doing at a very high level to drive a title run. He was clearly, to me, their best player throughout the postseason. He just wasn't their best pure scorer, and that's kind of what the evaluation ended up becoming, and that's why Jaylen Brown ended up racking up a couple of awards and recognition, and we restart this discourse about who's their best player when it's obviously Tatum. So I appreciate that. There's no question he's a top 10 player. I think he's higher than that. I think he's clearly like a top 7 guy at this stage. You could argue it, but I would have him in the top 7. But that being said, 28% from deep in the playoffs, like last year, is just not going to cut it this time around. Under 55% true shooting, bad efficiency, not going to cut it. I do think that that jump shot is going to swing back in the positive direction because the irony of this all is that in the home stretch of the regular season, he was as good a pull-up shooter as he's ever been. He was red hot, and then he went ice cold at a very untimely moment, and the team was able to survive it. But I don't think you can afford that sort of jump shooting from Tatum again this year. And I think that, as I said, the level of competition is just higher. If you're going to take down OKC in the finals with a top 5 player, with all the shot creation they have, with all the athleticism they have, with all the defensive personnel that they have, their offensive skill, their ability to play with pace, like, that is an awesome, loaded basketball team. It is going to require Tatum more so going head-to-head with whoever the opposing team's 1A level guy is offensively. He doesn't have to be better than them, but I think that he has to be more of an approximation than he was in this past run. Like, I just think the level of competition is so high that that is going to be expected and required of him this year. It can't just be nailing all the little things. And those little things make a big impact, right? When you can guard centers in the NBA Finals and you can switch 1 through 5, that was a huge component in shutting down the Dallas offense. And when you can just get by your man, when you can target Luka Doncic off switches and create dribble penetration over and over again and just make these drive and kick passes, like, that is going to have a pronounced offensive impact. He had a really pronounced impact on the NBA Finals, on the playoffs as a whole, without scoring very well. But there comes a point where it's just got to be the big thing too, right? If you're going to take 20 shots a game, you have to be efficient. You have to have some of those takeover scoring performances when the competition level is what I expect it to be this year. So that's one key that stands out to me in Boston's title defense. The one thing that maybe could stand in their way if Tatum doesn't get to that level offensively, although I do certainly expect him to be better than he was this past year. The other key is the big depth. And this is the irony, right? Boston was just so much better than everybody else last year that, like, the 2 red flags for them went in the wrong direction. Tatum was bad as a scorer, and Kristaps Porzingis got hurt, so their big depth was tested, and they still won the title. But this year, expecting better competition, KP is going to miss time. As we've said, he's already going to miss a month or 2 to start the season. You need a third big who can play if you're Boston. Ideally better than Cornette or Tillman, but you don't have that. So I shouldn't say that you need a third big. I would certainly like to have one, though. And it's just a lot on 38-year-old Al Horford's shoulders to ask him to carry the load of being a starter for the stretch of the season and ultimately being your second big. And he was very good in the finals. Like, I want to give him props. I thought that defensively his switchability was fantastic. He shot the ball decently well. I was a little concerned about him in the early rounds of the playoffs, but he really did his job in the finals. But it's just completely different what Kristaps Porzingis brings to the game. Al is going to be another year older. And they survived, man. They survived their biggest concern actually being their reality with Porzingis going down. But I just think it's going to be tougher this year. The East should be healthier. They should be better. And as you said, Dallas just wasn't a team with the top to bottom talent to beat Boston. So Boston is a clear favorite in the East. I do think that OKC is the most talented challenger in the West. I do think experience is a factor in Boston's favor in that matchup, though. I still think Denver is underrated as a threat. I get the concern over losing KCP. All of their depth, like, their roster is certainly flawed, but the Jokic factor is tough. He is really an unstoppable problem for Boston. I do not think that they have the answers for him defensively. And so even though Boston clearly has the better roster, like, that one overwhelming player factor is real, and the entire East is definitely stronger. So all of that makes it, to me, a more interesting race for this year's title, probably. But also, like, you can't underestimate how lethal they are with the healthy Kristaps Porzingis. This dude is one of the best pure rim protectors in basketball. He was the most effective post player in basketball. He's one of the best pick and pop bigs in basketball. And they didn't have him last year, and they still won the title.
And the formula is just so good. Like, on a broader level, winning defensively with one of the best transition scorers in all of basketball, because that's how Boston was able to withstand Jayson Tatum's offensive struggles. And that's where I want to give Jaylen Brown an immense amount of credit. His ability to just take the ball, say, get the F out of my way, I'm getting to the other side of the court and getting a bucket, it's huge. And that's a huge strength for Boston. It's win defensively, get out on the break, get Jaylen the ball, let him go to work. And that's the scary thing about playing this team is not only can they do that, they also have one of the most volatile offenses in all of basketball with all of this floor spacing and shooting, with a 40% catch and shooter in Derek White, who, when you look into the advanced numbers, Derek White is shooting 39 to 40% consistently from deep on tough shots with guys in his face closing out. Like, that's the other scary thing about playing this team is not only can they muck it up and play this grimy brand of defensive basketball, they can also barrage you with three after three after three and create these insurmountable leads in individual games where you just can't come back from it. The Celtics can win in a lot of ways. I still think they're the most talented team in basketball. And so it's interesting you think they're going to have a little bit of a championship hangover, and I understand it. Maybe you come out a little flat. Porzingis isn't going to be out there. Will likely miss a little bit more time, even more so than the first 2 months. I think they're still going to win 60 games. I have this team going 60-22, so it's a little bit of a step back from last year, but again, man, I just believe in the talent, the coaching on this team, and their formula so much. The Celtics right now are still my title front runner.
And I think that they've earned that. And you have them winning 60 games. I mean, obviously that's not a big difference between us, but that totally could happen even in the absence of KP. They were 17-4 without him in the regular season last year. They were 7-1 without Jayson Tatum in the regular season last year, Logan. Like, this is just a team that is loaded in a truly historically special way. You mentioned the shooting ceiling. They make 2 more threes per game than anybody else in the league last year. Their offensive rating is 2 points better than anybody else. Like, there was a gap in terms of their explosiveness, their ceiling. You pair that shooting with the fact that they're so big and physical, and they have forwards and an extremely skilled center who can just mismatch attack like crazy and create advantages, and then they have crazy shooting around them, and Jrue Holiday and Derek White are your 4th and 5th options. Derek White was awesome offensively in the playoffs. Like, most teams would kill to have him as a 3rd option for sure. He'd be a legitimate 2nd option on top of all that he does defensively as a playmaker. It's just insane. It is insane how good this team is, and there's no question that it's title or bust expectations for them, because last year they had every piece in place. This year they have every piece in place. They're a phenomenal, phenomenal basketball team. But Logan, I do think that the competition within their division and the league, but specifically their division, is going to be better this year. So I'm very interested. Between New York and Philly, who do you have finishing second in the Atlantic this year?
I have New York, and I only have 2 games separating both of these teams. I think it's going to be very, very close. And I want to start with New York with just how great their playoff run was last year. And I know they don't get to the conference finals. They underachieve a little bit. But considering the circumstances, I think it was really impressive. And not only do I think the Knicks pose the biggest threat to Boston in the Eastern Conference, I think this team has a chance to be the best Knicks team in a very long time. Just with the talent level. And you look back to their playoff run, the Knicks recipe is so interesting. It's not going to be pretty, but they're going to make you work for every possession. They're going to grind you out, and they're just going to outwork you. I mean, there's so many games where they're down a guy, and they just make them work. I always think back to that Philadelphia game where they just steal it right at the buzzer. Philadelphia's in control of that basketball game. And New York steals it. And you got to give a ton of credit to Jalen Brunson. I mean, he had a truly heroic playoff run. He's one of 4 players in NBA history to average 32 points per game and 7 assists per game over multiple playoff rounds. That list includes LeBron, who did it 3 times, which is just ridiculous, man.
Nasty.
The other guys on this list, Michael Jordan and Devin Booker. Now, I do think when I read off a stat like that, I think it's very important to emphasize with Brunson, by far had the least efficient run of any of those guys. All of those guys are above 60% true shooting, so they're giving you elite production with elite efficiency. Brunson did that on 53.6% true shooting. So I just want to emphasize here, it's very impressive that he did that. It was a little bit inefficient, but I think it shows that he is capable of taking on that kind of workload in just producing in the raw. That in a playoff setting, in a rock fight, in a grimy-ass game, Jalen Brunson can still do that for you. And what I think is very encouraging about that is that he's probably not going to have to take on that kind of load this playoff run. The Knicks should not only be better defensively, they should have more help offensively. You add in Mikal Bridges. I think him and OG Anunoby form the best wing tandem in the league. You've got some really good shooters around him and Dante DiVincenzo. Bridges and OG Anunoby aren't bad shooters either. My one concern, I have two concerns about this Knicks team when it comes to playoff team, because I think they are more talented, right? You're going to have Josh Hart, who can start for you in a pinch, who's going to come off the bench. I love Deuce McBride. I think that guy is phenomenal. Yeah. The two X factors, swing factors that are going to either make or break the Knicks season. It starts with Julius Randle, and we do this spiel every time with the Knicks.
Yeah.
How does he mesh with this unit? It feels like he is the odd man out of this group for a few reasons. One, I just think Bridges and Anunoby have way more seamless, this includes DiVincenzo and Josh Hart, way more seamless off-ball skill sets where they can just play off-ball better. They can do little things that complement this team and slick the wheels a little bit more. And I think it can work. I think Randle can work here, but it's going to take a real commitment of Randle committing to a role and doing little things and imposing himself less on the game. And I'm not saying Julius shouldn't attack in isolation, or he shouldn't get to his mid-range pull-ups, or he shouldn't try to barrel himself downhill, but it's going to take him doing less of that and not being this kind of black hole that we know Julius Randle can be. Again, he's had two of the most disastrous playoff runs I've seen from a borderline star-level player against the Hawks, where he's basically the only guy on the team, and I cut him slack with that playoff run. But last playoff run, he gets benched. Horrible. Right? I mean, it's one of the worst performances I've seen from a guy like that. The other component, and Carson, I think I'm more concerned about this component for the Knicks than I am with Julius Randle, and that's saying something. I think Mitchell Robinson has to stay healthy. Yeah. And when you look at his career, 2022 is the lone close to fully healthy we've seen from Mitchell Robinson where he's consistently starting. And I can't overstate the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That is a massive, massive loss for the Knicks. Not only what he does on the court, he had the fifth best defensive field goal percentage inside 6 feet. That's minimum 6 defensive field goal attempts per game. He was just one of the elite rim protectors in all of basketball last season. And you think about what he did during the playoff run. The floater range shot making you saw from him and Brunson, where this offense has grinded to a standstill. They can't get anything going offensively. That little two-man game with Hartenstein got them some tough clutch buckets. You think about the screen setting that he provides you. And then again, just as a replacement for Mitchell Robinson, when Robinson isn't healthy or when Robinson fouls out early in a game and you need this guy to come in and step in, it's an invaluable role. And Isaiah Hartenstein, I think, is really underrated still. I know that people give him his flowers. He's a damn good center. And now the luxury for Oklahoma City, having a guy that they can start alongside Chet Holmgren and have an elite tandem of rim protectors on the court at the same time, but also having a replacement level big where if you need Holmgren off the court, give him a break. Hartenstein can hold down that 5 spot really, really well. And so you look at the guys behind Mitchell Robinson now in this depth chart, it's up to Precious Achiuwa and Jericho Sims to step into that role. I don't think Jericho Sims can do it. He's undersized. Sure, he's athletic. He doesn't have that kind of rim protection ceiling. I think he's not as skilled as Hartenstein. He's just not the same kind of caliber of player. And Achiuwa, I've been very critical of Achiuwa in the past. I thought he had a good playoff run. I'll give him his props. When he was on the floor, I thought he did his job at a high level. But again, there's levels to this. You're going from an upper echelon starter level player in Isaiah Hartenstein to a serviceable backup big. And if Mitchell Robinson goes down, I'm really worried about this team because they don't have that kind of depth that can just step in there, and he is a meaningful difference, right? And so I question, do the Knicks go to like small ball five, where you're running Randall at the five, where you're running OG and Anunoby at the five? That might be a better answer on both sides of the floor. But the bottom line is you just don't have that luxury of having Isaiah Hartenstein able to plug in and play whenever you need him. And that's a meaningful loss to me for the Knicks. So the two biggest swing factors, Julius Randle has got to figure out his role on this team and has to commit to playing that role. And Mitchell Robinson has to stay healthy. And those aren't just things that you can sweep under the rug. Those are very, very big concerns for this Knicks team. And what I think are title level expectations, Carson. I think this is a team that expects to be in the championship race at the end of this season. It's not going to be like championship or bust the way it was for Boston last season, but it's like Eastern Conference title run or bust. And again, I think Robinson and Randall are two very big concerns in that recipe.
I'm with you 100%. I think that these are far and away the two most crucial elements that have to go right for the Knicks, and unfortunately, they are two elements that concern me. I don't trust Julius Randle. His playoff career, man, 17 points per game on 46% true shooting. His playmaking has been atrocious. He has been incapable of handling doubles. He's been a turnover machine, and his jump shot has just completely failed him. And he's a very hot and cold player. He is streaky, but you have gotten the very bad end of that. You have gotten straight cold in the playoffs. He has the worst efficiency of any 15-point per game playoff scorer in the NBA since 2000. Man, and that's not relative to the league like currently that year. That is just overall. If you're not aware, true shooting percentage league-wide has jumped like 5-6% since the early 2000s, and he's still the least efficient. And as you say, there are just some fit questions. He is a high-volume, ball-stopping player, and that's why I think the Knicks are so talented. Their depth is so impressive that if Randall is off offensively, if he's taking you out of rhythm and he's ice cold, or if he's getting destroyed in a matchup, probably defensively, where it's a little bit trickier to find a spot for him because he's a little bit more slow-footed, he's not always the most engaged defensively, then I would just be willing to bench him for extended stretches. I think you can go Brunson, Dante, Mikal, OG, Mitch, and then that's a really good lineup. You have more shooting, you're quicker, you have, as you say, more intuitive off-ball fits around Brunson, where it's still different from last year, because even though he'd be creating a ton in that lineup, like there's just more skill, there's more shot making, there's more athleticism around him. And that group is probably better defensively. You're losing stuff, of course. You're losing out on the rebounding that Randall provides at the four, which is huge. It does put more of a burden on Brunson because Randall does provide an aspect of just star shot creation, shot making when he's on. His ability to bully dudes at his size and at times put on these tough shot making displays and at times create shots for his teammates because he's drawing extra defensive attention. That's something nobody else on this roster can replicate. I just think you have to be flexible with Randall. You cannot just be married to the idea that, okay, he's our second best player. He is out there on the floor no matter what, because I'm still not 100% convinced that he's part of this team's long-term future. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced at all, dude. I think this is very much a make or break year for him. And this is his last season under contract. Then he has a player option. It's only $30 million. I don't think that he'll take that. And so if you're the Knicks, I think you're evaluating this closely. Like, if you don't like the fit, if you think it is clunky with him and OG and Mikal, some people think that that lineup is going to be too big. I don't think so, because I love how Mikal guards. I love how OG guards wings, and then Randall brings that elite rebounding at the four, where Mikal and OG are not great positional rebounders if you scale them up to being the 3 and the 4. Like, I'm not as worried about it as some in that respect, but if you just think, okay, he's not working here, he regresses again in the playoffs, I'd be very willing to move off of him, because I think you have such a great foundation with all of these dudes, with Brunson shot creation, with these awesome superstar role players is what I would call them. And then you can maybe try to find somebody at the 4 who isn't nearly as high usage a player, but is a better fit defensively, has more of a simple role offensively. And you could probably still be really, really good with that formula. But if Randall is good If he holds up in this playoff run, then great. That gives this team a real title ceiling. So we'll see. That is absolutely, to me, a major key that you're tracking. But the other is losing Hartenstein, both because he's awesome and also because of the pressure that it puts on Mitchell Robinson to stay healthy. He's never played more than 27 minutes per game in a season. Mitch has not. And in the last 4 years, he's missed 40% of New York's games. That puts pressure on Precious that I don't like. And if Mitchell gets hurt, like that's the thing. It's not just Precious having to play, 18 minutes a night as a backup. Props to him. He plays hard. He's very undersized for being a 5. He still has these moments where he thinks he's more skilled than he is. Like, props to him, dude. He left it all out there in the playoffs. I don't really like him as a backup center. And if he's going to go out there and have to be my starting center for any stretches, then I'm with you, dude. I would consider going small with Randle at the 5. Even though defensively, Randle at the 5 is not pretty. You're just so much better offensively. He can still hold down the glass at that 5 spot at least. He does not nearly bring the rim protection, but Precious starting to me is tough when you just have such superior players who are just more perimeter oriented. I'd rather have those dudes on the floor if it comes down to it. I also think Mitch quietly needs to be a better rim protector, though. I thought that in the playoffs, he did a very good job guarding Embiid just in man situations. He's so big and strong, and he has good hands. I think that he's continued to improve in that respect. I thought that he was able to offer more individual resistance than Hartenstein, but Hartenstein is the better overall defender because he is so much more effective guarding in space, and also because he was such a superior rim protector last year. Like, Mitch allowed opposing players to shoot 70% at the rim when he was the primary defender in the regular season. That's horrible. And in the playoffs, they still shot slightly better than average. His block rate was down from about 7% in his career to just 4% last season. And the Knicks defense was about 6 points per 100 possessions worse with Mitch on the floor. So I think he's a better defender than that indicates. I think he's a better rim protector. It's just concerning because we did see some regression in the regular season compared to the previous standard. I'm not super worried about that because I thought he was pretty good in the playoffs, but Hartenstein was the better defender overall, and now Mitch has got to be awesome because he doesn't have 25 minutes a game of Hartenstein when he's off. Like, he has to carry the center spot defensively for the Knicks. And also, as you mentioned, Hartenstein was a way better offensive player who was vital, running handoffs, switch that touch finishing in the paint. Both of them are great offensive rebounders, but he was really vital to securing extra possessions as well. Like, just his touch, his playmaking adds a completely different dynamic to this Knicks offense that I think overall is going to be very comparable to last year because they have more talent on the perimeter. You add Mikal. You should have a full season, hopefully, of OG and Randle healthy, which they didn't have last year. So that, to me, makes up for it. Like, this team is more talented overall. I want to be clear. I have higher expectations for them than last year. But the Hartenstein loss hurts. It's concerning. It puts a lot of pressure on Mitchell Robinson to both be damn good and to be consistently healthy in a way that he just hasn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I like their depth more, too, just because now you're switching the roles from DiVincenzo and Hart. Instead of starting during the playoff run, you shuffle them to the bench, but it gives them more lineup versatility, which I really like, right? In the playoffs, come time, if guys aren't hitting their shots, you swap them out. If you like these guys in a certain matchup more than the other ones, you can do a full platoon swap almost. My thing with Randle, just to circle back, the final point I'll make on that is I do wonder if the Knicks should be shopping him throughout the start of this season until the trade deadline. And the reason I say that is I think Randle is what puts them over the top, but if it's not a great fit, this is still a pretty movable contract right now, right? If Randle does want to get paid, I don't know how many teams are lining up to pay Julius Randle. Like, what do you think he demands? Like $40 million? Like what is he?
Yeah. I think even with all his flaws, and that's my concern, is in terms of trading, in terms of giving up assets for a dude you're going to have to pay after this year. Like, I don't think there's a line out the door for that, but money is just growing so rapidly around the league that I think Randle will look at himself and he'll say $30 million. Isaiah Hartenstein just got $30 million, and I damn near would rather have Hartenstein on my team just because I know he's going to excel in his role. But I don't think Julius Randle will view it that way, and I think there will be a team who is going to say, all right, well, with your volume, yeah, we'll pay you $40 million.
Yeah, I mean, the Nets could probably use a guy like Julius Randle. Yeah, I guess that's the double-edged sword, man. Is he gives them this really high ceiling when it comes playoff time if he figures it out because of his skill set. But like you said, I don't know if you're going to recoup enough value in a trade because his trade value is pretty low right now. Like,
yeah,
he is going to hit the open market. It's tough, man. My gut is probably saying that the Knicks are going to hold on to him and see what happens during playoff time and see if it works. But
and I don't think that's the wrong decision. You would have to get back a comparable talent at the position because I think you would probably need to address the 4 spot. Like, I'm not as high on OG as your full-time 4.
Yeah, neither am I, but the other alternative would be to get another backup big maybe for Mitchell Robinson, and then you move everybody down and slide in DiVincenzo or Hart at the 2 spot and move everybody down a position.
Yeah, but you're not getting a backup big back as the centerpiece of a Randle deal. No chance. The upside is just too great with him on the floor if he plays very well.
You'd get a backup big, and then you'd get a pick or something like that. But yeah, I don't think that's enough value.
What do picks matter to the Knicks, though? They just gave away all their picks for Mikal. Like, I just don't think that there's a deal on the table. You know, if it were like, oh my God, last year, what if we could just swap him for Lauri Markkanen? It's like, yeah, of course you would do something like that. That's not going to happen. There's not a comparable player who is coming available for Julius Randle just with the baggage, the fact that you'll have to pay him, all those factors.
True, but on a large scale, I do think the Knicks pose the biggest threat to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. I think they're jumbo-sized. They're huge. Again, this is assuming both teams are at full health. They match up with the Celtics physically, which is something that's just really hard to do. Nobody in the Celtics starting lineup is smaller than 6'4", right? And so Brunson is the odd man out there, but he's not small. He's 6'2". Everybody else in the Knicks lineup,
he's small.
Bridges is 6'6". OG Anunoby is 6'7". Randall's 6'8". Robinson's over 7 feet tall, and so they're strong. They match up physically with Boston. I think they probably have the best defense again at full strength that could match up with Boston out east. I think they pose the biggest threat, but it's gonna come down to those 2 things that we've mentioned. Robinson's got to be healthy, available throughout the playoff run and in that series, and Randall has to be good, which is concerning, and he also has to play his role to a high level. But all that being said, even with those question marks, I still think the Knicks pose the biggest threat to Boston in the Eastern Conference.
It's close to me between them and Philly in terms of who poses the biggest threat. I think it's a very interesting matchup for New York because I think that they have put together the best defensive wing tandem in basketball with Mikal and OG, and I think that those two are very well equipped to take on the Jays. The problem there is just what do you do with the Julius Randle defensively in that series? Like, that's what's so hard about playing the Celtics. You can't hide people in the way that you can in other matchups because whoever they're guarding is going to be an extremely skilled offensive player, and also they will be relentless in hunting those switches and trying to get the matchup that they want for their best players. So I'm not saying that Randle is a disastrous defensive player. He's just not a good one. And Brunson is smart. He's competitive, but he is small. And there's just nobody better at exploiting those guys than the Boston Celtics. If it were just, hey, we have 2 man defenders who match up really well against their 2 great players, well, then the Knicks would have it solved because I think that they have that. But it's just much more complicated than that. But they do have enough combinations that I think that they can find a decent enough solution in that matchup, right? If it is trying to hide Randle on Drew, if it is saying, all right, Julius, you're also playing poorly offensively, we can't have you out there right now. We want DiVincenzo in. He's a quicker, more competitive perimeter defender, and let's just go with this quicker, dynamic shooting lineup. We like how we match up defensively. Like, they do have options. And also, they're set up well to guard a lot of the best teams in the East. You think about Philly. You've got damn good options for Maxey. You put Mikal on him, one of the best defenders for a Maxey archetype in basketball with his length, his quickness, presuming that he fully locks in defensively, which he will. That's his role here. And then you have a great option for PG with OG. You have a good option for Embiid with Mitchell Robinson. right? Obviously, Embiid is a monster who you can't really contain if he's going to play his best. But like Mitch is a pretty good option to throw at him. Milwaukee, you have a Dame option with Mikal. You have Giannis options. OG, you might put Mitch on him for stretches. Indiana, you have a Halliburton option with Mikal. You have a Siakam option with OG. Like, I really like the fact that they have put together these two wings, but one of them is capable of guarding bigger wings in Mikal. Not like true fours, but he can guard most wings, and he's excellent at defending guards. And then you have OG, who is awesome defending wings, can defend some guards, but then also really can defend those bigger forwards, can even defend certain like centers, at least for little stretches. We saw him take on the Embiid matchup for a little bit in their series last year. I really like this team, man. I think they should be a top 10 sort of defense. Offensively, Brunson is just absurd. Last year, they were a 95th percentile offense with him on the floor. After the Randall injury, they were still the number 6 offense in basketball. And now you should be healthier. You should be more skilled. And it just doesn't get better for dudes like Mikal and OG to just say, okay, we need you to cut, we need you to knock down threes, and we need you to defend your asses off. Like, that is what those two dudes do just about as well as anybody on the planet. And when the expectations in terms of shot creation are limited, it's just, okay, you're our third option, you're our fourth option. I think it's an ideal environment for those guys to thrive. And the depth is insane. As you mentioned, like Dante, Hart, Deuce, those guys being your 6th through 8th men is absurd. Dante DiVincenzo just averaged 18 points per game on 43% from deep in a 13-game playoff run. Josh Hart averaged 14.5, 11.5, and 4.5. Like, those dudes were, by the end of it, the 3rd and 4th best players on a team that very nearly went to the Eastern Conference Finals. Now they're coming off the bench. It's just a huge advantage to have that sort of lineup versatility, to have the ability to bring a dude off your bench like that and have him swing a game. And the one last depth piece who I want to mention, who I want to shout out, I think Tyler Kolek is really good. I thought that was an amazing pick at number 34. He's 23. He's extremely pro-ready. He can really shoot, but above all else, he's a super shifty, crafty driver. Always plays at his own pace, and a very smart point guard, a very good passer who just commands the game. So if you were going to say, hey, I need somebody who can really command my second unit, which I love Deuce, that's not his skill set. He's not that sort of playmaker. Defensively, dog, very good shooter. But somebody who can just set the tempo, right, control the game, I think that's what Kolek could do from day one. I think he's a better bench ball handler than Deuce, and I think you can play them together. Deuce is such a dog defensively that you've been able to play him alongside Brunson, 2 small guard lineups. I think against bench units, you could do the same with him and Kolek. So I'm excited, dude. This team is going to be awesome. And on top of all this talent and this depth and the fact that they have Brunson, who was, a very legit offensive number 1, they just play so hard. And last year they played so together. And I hope that they maintain that. I don't think they would lose that. The only thing that could kind of stand in the way of that to me is Brunson. But I still think those are qualities that make this team really, really awesome. So I have them winning 53 games. I have them as my 2 seed in the East.
I have them winning 52 games, just one behind you. I don't have the seeding here yet. I'll wait until we get to completing the Eastern Conference. But you do have them second in this division, though, as well.
I have them second in this division. I think it's a very interesting conversation with Philly, though. I think that these two teams are neck and neck, and honestly, there are certain components that make me think I favor New York in this context, certain things that make me think I favor Philly. There's a floor versus ceiling aspect there. And let's get into all of that. So what are you expecting from the Sixers this year, Logan?
So I don't have these teams separated by a ton record-wise. I have the Philadelphia 76ers winning 50 games. I have the Knicks winning 52. So it's very, very slim margins. The biggest difference to me and why I'm a little bit more confident in the Knicks being better in the regular season and the playoffs is the continuity aspect and the fact that, we've just seen it before. There's a lot of moving parts here in Philadelphia, right? They bring in Eric Gordon. They bring in Paul George. They bring in Caleb Martin. They bring in KJ Martin. They bring in Andre Drummond, Reggie Jackson. There's just a lot of new toys here in Philadelphia, and so I just wonder if it's going to take a little bit for them to gel together. What I want to start with, we already know who 3 of the starters are going to be, Maxey, PG, Embiid. Carson, who do you think flanks the other 2? Because I think there are some different lineup combinations that you could go with. Who do you starts at the 2 and the 4 for this team?
I think it's Oubre and Caleb Martin. I think PG is actually probably effectively your 4. I just think you have the dynamic between Caleb and Eric Gordon. I think there's no question that Oubre is going to start. I mean, just with what he brings defensively and athletically. If he shoots better than last year, that's just a really good basketball player. And the shot's a big question, so maybe he won't, but I just think he's earned a starting spot. Gordon versus Martin. Eric Gordon is the more dynamic offensive talent, right? I mean, the shooting ability, the range. He's still a bulldog as a driver. I just think that Caleb is probably sort of a more seamless fit as a low-usage player. You still attack closeouts, decent shooter, not the same offensive player, but then defensively he's just going to be an absolute hound, crazy high-effort player. I'd probably rather have him, and you get a little bit more size, you get a little bit more rebounding with him. I think that gives you a very switchable, versatile defensive wing grouping of 2 through 4 where those guys are kind of interchangeable positionally.
I agree with that assessment, and I also think Eric Gordon can just be a little bit more frustrating in terms of how he overimposes himself on the game. I think you saw that last year in Phoenix where, and it's not every game, but there's just spots like late in games where it's possession.
He likes to pull from 30 feet.
He likes to bring the ball up the floor, and it would just be a bad turnover, and it's like, bro, you have Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker on your team. Like, get the ball out. You're Eric Gordon. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, bro, but you're Eric Gordon, man. Get the ball out of your hands. So I just think it's better for him if he's off the bench, commanding the bench unit a little bit. And that's where he can, I think, thrive in a role like that, where he doesn't have to worry about doing too much. Another final reason before I get into my X factors for Philadelphia, another reason why I also prefer the Knicks, I like their bench a little bit more too. I just think they have more quality bench players in Philadelphia, and that matters to me. The biggest X factor, and we all know this, it's all about how healthy and available Joel Embiid can be come playoff time and how he performs. Now, I thought this last playoff run, 2024, the most encouraging playoff showing of his career. He gives you 50 points at basically 70% dealing with Bell's palsy. Like, could have been less than that. He was just so clearly far away from at his best. I thought he dealt with double teams better. I thought he was more efficient. Like, I just thought it was a cleaner playoff run from him. But I still do have my concerns. I do think this is the best team Embiid has ever had around him, but I'm worried about him stagnating this offense in the way that Embiid does. Guys not moving off ball. Embiid just sitting there at the elbow, pulling a jumper. I don't think it's the most conducive to winning offense. I worry about his conditioning come playoff time. Again, I think that's included with his health. But if he can just be out there and be 80 to 100%, which at this point, Carson, I think it's harder for me to expect Embiid to be fully healthy and available at this point. He just hasn't done it. Yeah. And so for me to expect this year to be different, I think is insanity. Like, it just is. Like, Embiid has shown us who he is time and time again. So for me to expect this to be a different year is rose-tinted glasses. But I'm hopeful. I hope that this can be the year. And if that means Embiid exerting himself less in the regular season and playing less, I think that's what the Sixers have to do. Playing Drummond more. And I think that's a luxury that Embiid hasn't had. Having a backup center that can actually play real minutes. Drummond's not some superstar at this point in his career, but he can give you a solid 20 a night and rebound the ball. The other component to me and swing factor here for the 76ers is if Tyrese Maxey continues to ascend. Now, I happen to think that he's close to his full potential or reaching there. I mean, I thought last year was really impressive considering that Embiid is out for a big stretch of the regular season, and Maxey really had to run the show. Now, I think you see some of his limitations as a number one guy in that sense, but I think it was helpful for him, right? You're just going to naturally improve having to do more, and I think it did. He 25 points per game, 6 assists per game, 57% true shooting. The kid's blinding quick. He's got phenomenal change in pace. He's an elite shooter, and he's a flamethrower. I mean, this playoff run, especially as a number two, like, I really trust Maxey as a number two scorer, especially when you have such complementary players around him in Embiid, an awesome pick-and-roll partner, and now Paul George as a tertiary guy. I really like the situation for him, and I think Maxey is going to thrive as the number two guy. And I think he's improved as a playmaker. My favorite thing about him, though, is probably just his efficiency. Like, Maxey doesn't turn the ball over. He makes
Mm-hmm.
good decisions. He makes smart passes. He's so freakishly efficient. Like, I know I'm getting that every single game with Maxey. And then you introduce Paul George. I think this is a better situation for him, too. We talked about this a lot last season, Carson, but him being tasked with being the number 2 guy and then in the playoff run having to step up and be, almost a number 1 guy, you're just asking PG to do too much. And him being the de facto number 3 here is really good. Play high defense, knock down a high percentage of your catch and shoot looks. He was near 40% off the catch last season. He's going to thrive in that role. And then pick his spots in certain spots when you need to step up as a ball handler or as a playmaker and take on possessions. It's just a luxury Philadelphia hasn't had. I think this is the best roster that Joel Embiid has ever had here in Philadelphia. I think that they're set to contend in a way that they haven't in previous years. And again, I think some of the Sixers' playoff shortcomings definitely falls on Embiid's shoulders. But I think this is the best team he's ever had around him, and that's why I'm encouraged that this could be a different year. All 3 of the best teams, in my opinion, are in the Atlantic Division to compete for the title. Or out of the East, excuse me. It's Boston, it's New York, and then it's Philadelphia. And the margins between New York and Philadelphia are really close to me. So I expect the team representing the East to come out of this division. And Philadelphia is on that short list of real deal contenders in the Eastern Conference to me. The reason that I have the Knicks and Celtics higher than them and the reason that I'm more confident is I believe in their depth, I believe in their top-end talent, and I'm just skeptical about Joel Embiid's propositions as being healthy and being the player he needs to be in the playoffs.
I do think that this is one of the best versions of the Sixers that we've seen under Embiid. I would say the second best. I think that the 2019 team, when you have Jimmy playing at that level, you have Ben Simmons as good as he ever was. JJ, one of the best spot-up shooters in basketball. Tobias Harris. Like, that was a really, really strong starting 5 in a team that obviously lost at the very last moment to the eventual champs in Toronto. But I'm super high on a lot of aspects of this team. I love the Paul George fit. I think that he is still an awesome player. I think he is an awesome fit. In several ways, he had a career-best season. Last year, his efficiency was the best it's ever been. He's an elite spot-up shooter, and you mentioned, Logan, that he can pick his spots more as a creator because he is your third option now in terms of volume, but he was a 90th percentile efficiency and an 80th percentile efficiency isolation creator last year. 90th percentile pick and roll, 80th percentile isolation. So as an on-ball creator, like, he still has juice and he's super versatile on both sides of the ball. I think that he is just like the ideal third star. I think he's an awesome fit here. I think he complements their star duo that was already in place very nicely. And Maxey was outstanding in the playoffs, dude. I mean, he basically gives you 30 a night on 60% true shooting. The key for him is going to be his consistency as a pull-up shooter this season, because his growth as a shooter overall since he was a prospect has been really, really impressive from beyond the arc. But last year, out of the 25 guys to attempt the most pull-up jumpers, he was tied with Ant for being last in pull-up efficiency. He's a better shooter than that. We've seen it, but that was the reality of his efficiency last year. So if that pull-up jumper is more consistently dialed, when he pairs that with his speed, his ability to attack the paint, and he has Joel Embiid alongside him, because that's another reason that Maxey's efficiency went down last year. He was just far less efficient without Embiid on the floor. And Maxey is damn near unguardable. Dude, he's not just great out of pick and roll. I mean, he's got a beautiful floater game as well, and you mentioned the change in pace, but in transition, he's phenomenal with that full court speed. Spotting up, he's a ridiculous catch and shoot guy. Like, he's just such a good fit with other stars. He has such a blend of that on-ball and off-ball value, and I do think he'll be more efficient this year because Embiid should be healthier, and I think he'll only continue to improve. Like, as I said, he can have a better pull-up shooting season. He can keep getting better as a playmaker. He's never going to be elite there, but you already see the leap that he took last year just by the nature of having the ball in his hands so much more. Like, I don't know why he wouldn't marginally improve again this year. He's still young. He's still growing in terms of taking on those responsibilities, and he could reach that, like, legit all-NBA level this season. So those are pretty amazing dudes to be your second and third options. And then Embiid is just obviously an utterly dominant regular season force. He was having one of the best regular seasons we've seen before he got hurt last year. Over the last 4 years, Philly plays at a 58-win pace when he's on the floor, and I do think he's the best that he's ever been. You can talk about some of the same issues that came up in the playoffs, but his jumper held up better. His playmaking was better than it's been. For him, everything is ultimately going to be about the postseason, but I think I can say that this is the best version of Embiid that we've seen. So this should absolutely be the best big three in basketball, and that is the top-end talent that makes this team very, very intriguing, because outside of that, the rest of this roster is largely new. And, some of these guys, they had to kind of pick up on real value adds, find them off the scrap heap a little bit. I don't mind Martin and Oubre starting on the wings. They are both questionable shooters, but they're long, they're athletic, they're versatile defensively. You do have the lack of a true four here in Philly. That's not a huge concern to me, though. I think that PG can check most power forwards, and I think if they have enough rebounding in the aggregate from the 2 through 4 spots with Oubre and Martin and PG to hold up there, it's a little bit of a thing against like a real big, powerful four. Julius Randle, honestly, being an interesting example, but I think that PG would do fine in that matchup. And I like a couple of their guys off the bench. Drummond is a good backup center. Obviously, wildly overrated at his prime, but as a backup center, I like him. Gordon still brings that shooting and driving ability. Jared McCain's shooting, I think, should make him playable. I don't think that he'll take Lowry's minutes initially, just because Lowry still shoots the ball at a really high level, and he just has such competitive instincts and such a high IQ. Like, you don't want him starting, but I think as just a 15-minute-a-game guy off the bench, he just has a veteran sense for the game that McCain can't have yet. So there's a lot that I do like with this Philly team. The bench is not comparable to New York's. The talent around their big three is not comparable to New York's. But that big three is ridiculous, and I do like how they built out this roster considering what was available to them. I have them winning 52 games because I expect Embiid to miss 20 to 30 games. PG was very healthy last year, but just based on the recent track record, he'll probably miss 20 or so games. So I think that the Knicks will be healthier, and even if they do sustain an injury outside of Robinson or obviously like Brunson, like they just have so many quality players that they should be able to hold up pretty okay. But this Philly team has the potential to be dominant, man. And when you do compare them to New York, they have easily 3 of the top 4 dudes in that series. Like, no question there is a tier gap between PG, Maxey, and Randall and OG. I do think that their team fit is very clean. I think it's very intuitive. They added a great third star. They added the sort of personnel around their 2 offensive fulcrums where all those dudes just fit in away from the ball. And they're athletic. And yes, I wish that Oubre and Martin were a little bit more consistent as shooters, but they're the right sort of player. I also trust their stars more. Embiid, of course, has his issues, and I do not trust his health whatsoever. And he has regressed in the playoffs every year of his career. So I'm not bailing him out. What I'm saying is it's not comparable to Randall, who has literally melted, crumbled, been an awful basketball player. Embiid is still so valuable defensively. He still demands so much offensive attention. He's just in a completely different stratosphere as a player. And he has the potential to just run over the entire league in a playoff run. And I trust Maxey. I know some people don't trust PG as a third option. Absolutely, I trust him. He's not going to be expected to score 25 points per game. He's a damn good third option. So when I think about what an NBA champion looks like, it's actually a bit easier for me to see it with Philly right now than it is with New York. And the reason for that is that they just have the sort of overwhelming talent at the top with the right combination of skill sets where you think about if things go right, like who has the ceiling to just look multiple powerhouses in the eyes in a row and outclass them? I think it's Philly. By a tad. I think it is the team with the best player, the dude who has the potential to just go complete supernova, outplay the best players in the world. That's Embiid. Love Brunson. Brunson doesn't have that potential. It's the second option who I believe can give you an efficient 28 a night from the perimeter. It's the third option who has the perfect skill set. Like, those sort of weapons give you a hell of a ceiling. The thing is, these teams are very close. I think that Philly does have that higher ceiling, but I do think New York has the higher floor because who do I trust more to be healthy? Who just has more quality players who I know will do their job? right? Who has the right identity as a basketball team that they've proven time and again? All of those things go in favor of the Knicks. I can talk about how intriguing this Philly team is because, boy, are they talented at the top of this roster. It's just hard to fully trust them. And you can just see the world where it's like, all right, well, Embiid is 70%. He plays in the playoffs. His playmaking is not good enough. He doesn't have his lift. He can't rely on his face-up jumper. That fails him. And, like, that's it. That's it for the team right there. They don't have a Dante DiVincenzo who can come in and save the day. They don't have a Josh Hart who can come in and save the day, much less an OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. And that's where I think that I slightly prefer New York. But it's really, really close, man. It's really close because Philly can be a problem. If everything goes right, they are a problem. But, again, it's hard to completely trust that that is the version that we're going to see.
I mean, I don't trust Philadelphia whatsoever. I don't trust Joel Embiid whatsoever. I don't know if I trust PG at this point in his career.
As a third option?
I mean, like, I trust him to an extent. I also know that PG could poop his pants like he's prone to do in the playoffs. I mean...
I think that's so overstated, dude.
Those aren't my biggest issues with Philadelphia, though. My biggest issues are I wonder about their size concerns against these other big physical teams in the East, how they physically match up with New York at full strength, how they physically match up with Boston at full strength. And then it is that shooting around them. I trust
Really?
Maxey and PG to hit
You worry
shots.
about how they physically match up with Boston? I think that they go
Boston and New
position
York.
for position.
And then my last concern
Hold on,
is
why?
just
Where is the glaring mismatch? I mean, Philly's got athletic wings. They've got length.
yeah,
they have a
Tatum's
massive center.
Tatum's stronger. Jalen Brown is stronger. KP is huge. Like,
But not by a greater margin than like other teams in the East. Like Philly's size is good overall.
Boston and New York are better rebounding teams. They're definitely like that's where I worry about them. And then shooting, I worry if Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin. I get that they can get hot and have their moments. I worry about their shooting ceiling, and then they just don't have guys that you can turn to on the bench that fix those holes. Right, that where if you were struggling, that you could put somebody like that in. If the Knicks are struggling to shoot, they put in, Dante DiVincenzo. If they need the Energizer Bunny, they put in Josh Hart. So it's all those components. I look at the Sixers like the Dallas Cowboys, man. You've burnt me so many times. I need to see it before I buy in, and I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, I get it. And that's why I slightly prefer the Knicks as well. And I want to be clear, like I think the Knicks do have the ceiling to knock out some heavyweights, but it's just going to be more of a grind. Like Philly just has the raw ability with their stars to outclass these teams in a way that is really, really impressive. But I'm with you. If Embiid had a track record of being the same player, it would be different. And as I said, I like what they've done with the depth, but it's just not comparable to what New York has. There's still just question marks with the dudes around the big three. So do I think this is a better season for Philly? Yes. But could I see them losing in the second round? Again, absolutely. I think that is very, very, very possible. And also the East is just better, right? I mean, only one of New York or Philly can even go to the conference finals if we're presuming that Boston is going to be the other team there. TD, Tutty. Taking it to the house, in for 6. Whatever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure. Touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or the defense, we don't care how they score them. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many TDs will be in a game. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick.
Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, Logan, now we take a good old-fashioned leap into a well here because we are going down multiple levels. Who do you have next in this division?
I've got the Toronto Raptors, and yeah, I mean, my expectations are not very high for Toronto. I think this is a it's another evaluating year. You just look at the young guys and see how much better they can get. You take inventory and take stock of your assets. The guy that I'm definitely pointing the finger at is Scottie Barnes, who last year had a really solid season, was an all-star, put up 28 and 6 on 57% true shooting. The guy's an elite athlete. I think we saw him grow offensively. He's nowhere near as janky as he was. Like, he just looks smoother handling the basketball and playmaking. And I also think there's another level this guy can reach defensively. He was near 1.5 steals per game and 1.5 blocks per game. And he's got one hell of a highlight reel, but I think he can be even more consistent and engaged on that end. Now, it's hard for me really imagining that. Like, if Toronto's as bad as they were last year, like, is Scottie going to make that kind of commitment because they're not competitive? I don't know. That's going to remain to be seen. And this is not me hating on Scottie, but I do think he got maybe a little overrated last year. I was really excited out of the gates. In the first month and first 2 months of the season, he was on a crazy shooting run. His pull-up jump shooting was phenomenal. He was, I think, over 40% from behind the arc. And, we're all sitting there kind of going, wow, is this permanent? Is this the version of Scottie that we're going to get jump shooting? It turned out to kind of be a little bit of fool's gold. Scottie shot 70% in the restricted area, was really good there, but he shot 37% on all shots outside of the restricted area. And that's where I'm really looking for Scottie to make this leap offensively. How consistent of an outside-the-paint shot maker is he going to be? Now, again, he made strides there last year. He looked way more comfortable and better shooting the ball in a way that I've never seen from Scottie. But again, it's the consistency of that leap. How often on a game-to-game basis is he going to be lights out from there? That I'm still a little skeptical. So Scottie's the first guy. And then it's RJ Barrett. I mean, RJ was phenomenal in Toronto. He was 22 points, 6 boards, 4 assists on 62% true shooting. He was 55% from the field, 39% from deep. He looks more comfortable. He looks happier in this role. And I think for RJ to reach his ceiling, he needed to be in a situation like this. The fit in New York just wasn't ideal. They wanted him to go spot up in the corner, attack closeouts, play more off ball. And I think RJ is a guy that, to reach his full potential, needed the opportunity in a spot here where he could, make mistakes and go out there and play a little more freely. And I think he was able to do that here. He looked better. But I mean, when you're looking at this team, I think the ceiling for them is like knocking on the door of a play-in. That's like the best I could see this team. And at worst, you're in the mid-20s of wins. I have this team winning 32 games, going 32-50. I like the talent here. There's a lot of young guys that I like. Scottie, RJ, Grady Dick, Emmanuel Quickley. I'm intrigued by Agbaji and Jacoby Walter off the bench, but this is a young, improving roster. They're just nowhere near to contention. This isn't going to be an elite offense. I think the offense is probably going to be a little bit ugly. It's just a little clunky right now with the shooting of Barnes, of RJ, of Jakob Poeltl. It's just going to be a little janky in that regard. And then defensively, I don't see them being, a top half of the league defense. This was a team that was bottom 7 in offensive rating, defensive rating, and net rating last season.
Yeah.
Again, they had an overhaul at the trade deadline, so this is going to look like a different team again this year. It's just hard for me to envision this team being above average on either side of the ball. And so, again, if they hit their peak, if we see massive improvements from all these young guys, I can see them being a feisty contender in the play-in. But that's about it. And, it's about what you get out of the young guys. The one young guy that I'm very intrigued by is Grady Dick. I like Grady Dick a lot just because of how good of a shooter he is. I don't ever see him being this kind of elite playmaker, but I think he's a special shooter, man. He was over 40% in one of the quarters. He was over 50% in the other corner. I think we're going to need to see growth from him on above the break threes, where he was just 30% last year. But he was a 39% mid-range shooter as a rookie. He has got a butter-smooth one-dribble pull-up game. I like Grady Dick a lot, and I think with their spacing concerns, he brings an element that this team desperately needs as a consistent floor spacer and off-ball shooter. So, yeah, I like a lot of the young guys here. I just think they're a young team, they're improving, and they're really, really far away from contention right now.
And you've always liked Dick a lot. I think that he's an interesting...
Oh, my God, bro. Oh, my God.
What? What did I say? You've always been a big fan of Grady Dick as a prospect. And by the way, I liked him as a prospect, too. He's solid. I think that he has good feel. I think he's a very good shooter. Unsurprisingly, had a bad defensive season as a rookie. The one thing that I would like to see more of from him is we saw zero self-creation out of him last year. And at Kansas, he was not a high volume on ball player, but he was a very efficient one. He was something like a 98th percentile pick and roll creator. And what I really did like was his playmaking. I thought he had very good feel. I thought he was a high IQ playmaker, and he just hasn't had the ball in his hands, hasn't shown that at the NBA level. So that to me makes him a much more appealing offensive player, because pure spot up shooting, yeah, man, it's good. But when you can't defend, it's not that rare a combination at all. But if you add a little bit of playmaking juice there, just a bit, then that changes who you are as a player. So that's what I would like to see out of Grady this year. But this is a really interesting young team because there are so many players who had fascinating seasons. You start with Scottie. I'm with you. I think people are a little high on Scottie right now, and I think he does a lot of things at a high level. But there's just the fundamental concern for him that's always been insane in my eyes, which is just his lack of skill as a self-creator. He's still a 49th percentile pick and roll scorer, 44th percentile post-up scorer, and 18th percentile isolation scorer. So all of the avenues to self-created offense, he's below average efficiency, and he could take another shooting leap. I'm not expecting that this season. I honestly think you just want him to maintain his percentages from last year because, as you mentioned, they really did trend down as the season progressed. And so until that aspect of his game improves, because you mentioned, yes, I think that he improved in those respects last year. He was smoother. He's still fundamentally sort of a clunky, weird on-ball player who lacks the skill, who lacks the touch outside the restricted area. And until he improves there, I won't see him as one of those elite talents. When you're comparing him to number one options around the league, he will remain one of the weakest in basketball. He's a very good all-around player. His playmaking is really impressive for a dude of his age and his size. It's just very good, period, point blank. And as you mentioned, he has the tools to reach another level defensively, just with more effort. His defense was his number one trait as a prospect. I don't see why he won't be an awesome defender in this league. He's already a good one. It's just situation and age, I would say, that's kept him from maximizing his potential. But yeah, there are people who want to say he's better than Paolo, and I'm not even high on Paolo. That's just an example of a conversation that I see a lot. I just think there's the gap in the shot creation skill set there that Scottie doesn't offset, even with his defensive ability. But we'll see how he progresses this year. I'm not necessarily expecting a ton of improvement. To me, probably the most interesting guy, though, is not their number one. It's not Scottie. It is RJ Barrett, because what we saw from him in Toronto last year was a different player than we saw in New York. In New York, last season, RJ was averaging 18, 4, and 2.5 on 53.5% true shooting. In Toronto, he averaged 22, 6.5, and 4 on 61.5% true shooting. So improvement across the board, insane leap in scoring efficiency, and a big leap in volume. His driving and finishing was absurd in Toronto. He shot 72% in the restricted area. For a guard, for a wing, that is an unreal number, especially in contrast to what it was in New York, which was 57%. I mean, that is a monumental improvement within the season. Also, 43% of his shots came inside 3 feet in Toronto. That was compared to under 28% in New York. 43%, again, for a guard, for a perimeter player, is obscene. That's like close to Giannis numbers just in terms of the percentage of your shots coming at the rim. And listen, I thought it was impressive driving. I really liked his pace. I did think his finishing touch, his ability to use his length and finish off the glass with finesse, it was really impressive. I also loved his cutting. I thought that he did a really nice job of tapping into his athleticism off ball, cutting at a rate that we hadn't seen in New York. And he also shot 39% from deep. Now, if I'm assessing which of these numbers do I buy, what improvement do I buy, the shooting is the one that I'm most skeptical of, that I don't necessarily buy, just because we've seen the three-point shot ebb and flow with RJ before, right? We saw him shoot 40% from deep in his second year, then we saw him regress to 31% in the 2023 season. I think that he is a mediocre shooter of the basketball, and 30 good games of shooting doesn't change that. But I am impressed by the driving stuff and the finishing. I do think he's improved. I do not think he's going to produce like we saw down the stretch. I do think you have to be weary of post All-Star game basketball on a bad team. I will say, rewatching a lot of this stuff, you're not exactly getting the peak defensive versions of all these teams once you're talking about April basketball. You know, we just see this every year where certain dudes emerge with late season offensive production that is exceeding what they've done previously, and then it's not necessarily the most legitimate. So if you're expecting RJ to be 22 points per game on 60% true shooting, good luck to you. I don't think that's happening, but I do think that he improved last year. And the other intriguing guy, Logan, is IQ, your boy, of course, who they also bring over from the Knicks. He gave you 19 and 7 on 56.5% true shooting last year. I think he can sustain something close to that. He brings the pull-up shooting. He brings the floater game. His playmaking was solid. He's limited athletically. He's going to struggle to get to and finish around the rim, and he's not going to be a high-level playmaker. I'm not really expecting improvement from IQ. I think he basically is who he is at this point. But, you know, he's a solid starting point guard.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, at this point, he's just a good starting point guard. I think he really is limited by the lack of rim pressure. Like, quickly never gets fully downhill. But the beauty is that he's got such elite floater touch with either hand. I mean, he can get off any shot. And I think he's a good stabilizer for this young group. Like, he's experienced. He's high IQ.
Yeah. Nice.
Was not
Brilliant.
intentional. Thank you. He's a good scorer of the basketball. And he's an insane shooter, man. Like, sometimes you'll see some, like, not the most consistently, but he'll pull with range sometimes, man, off the dribble. He'll catch his streaks, man. He can get hot. I like a lot of the young talent here, man, and it's intriguing to me what they're building towards. Do you see a much higher ceiling with any of these guys? Like, do you see any of these guys breaking through to a different stratosphere, a different level, a different caliber of player?
No, I don't. Definitely not this year. Scottie is the one who has the tools because he does so much well around his scoring. I just still worry about the scoring. I worry about the on-ball stuff. I worry about the shooting. I worry about his efficiency as a scorer. RJ, I just touched on. I think he's better. I don't think he's the dude who we saw in terms of his production down the home stretch. Grady Dick, I would like to see a little bit more out of. But no, that's the thing. I think that you can expect marginal improvement from most of these guys, right? Grady Dick's going into his second year. He will get better at basketball in all likelihood. But am I seeing the sort of needle-moving improvement this year where I'm like, yeah, Toronto is going to be a playoff team? No, I'm not. I can't rule it out, but I don't think it's likely. The league is just too good. And you mentioned we're seeing a new team, right? Because they blew things up midseason, but at the same time, they were 12 and 26 with IQ last year. They were 11 and 21 with RJ. And Scottie misses some games in there, but with either of those guys on the floor with Scottie, they're winning like a third of their games. You know, this team just still has a long way to go. I do like the fact they've got a couple of respectable veteran bigs with Olynyk and Poeltl. Those are just dudes who do their job, who you can bank on. Poeltl's going to protect the rim, bring touch finishing. Olynyk's going to be a bit of a passing hub. He'll bring his shooting ability. Just a smart, high-effort player. Those are two of Toronto's 5 best players. They just won't start together because Toronto's going to want to start Grady Dick. They want to play fast. They don't want 2 bigs out there. They want more spacing for Scottie and RJ, these dudes who, you know, can struggle shooting the ball a little bit and would be better served by more spaced out environments. Like, I get all that. I just worry about how small this team is because they are small, Logan. And they really struggle defensively. They were 25th. We could see some improvement there because you have Poeltl and you have Scottie, but their backcourt is very limited, very small, limited athletically. After the trades, they were 29th in rebound rate, man. And then on top of that, they just don't have seamless offensive creation. Like, you can praise IQ and RJ relative to expectations, but most teams in the league today, they have an offensive engine, dude. They have a dude who is going to manufacture high percentage looks. I just don't think that there is that guy in Toronto, and the shooting is still below average. They were 26th in threes made last year, 27th in three-point percentage. Still have questions about Scottie and Poeltl and RJ. So, yeah, I think that we'll see marginal improvement because this team is young, and so that means that they should improve. But the NBA is just Really talented. It's just hard to win games these days. The one last dude I do want to talk about quickly is Jacoby Walter, who they bring in at pick 19. Thought it was a fine pick. He's got good defensive tools. He's got good length. He's a good shooter off the catch. Really struggles to finish at the rim. I think he was like 46% at the rim last year. He's a limited on-ball creator overall. He's got some playmaking feel, but not something you can really bank on and say, I want to put the ball in his hands. So not a guy I would expect to have a particularly impactful rookie year if you're looking at other dudes who could change the outlook for this Toronto team.
Yeah, I like Jacoby. I think he could be a really good 3-and-D wing. Like, he's got tools right now. He's just really, really young. And considering the other wing depth on this team, I don't know how much burn he's going to get immediately anyways. But Jacoby was a solid pick. I liked him a little bit. He's just got physical tools that other guys don't, and he is a good shooter of the basketball. I think he was a little bit overtasked at Baylor in terms of his role.
For sure. Definitely asked to be a real lead guy. Maybe couldn't fully tap into all of his defensive tools there. I do think that the best version of him is just a 3-and-D guy at this level. We got to shout out Ochai Logan, who you mentioned, just for being one of the most handsome dudes in the NBA. Let's talk about the Nets, Logan. The Brooklyn Nets are in yet another rebuild. Now, Mikal is gone, of course, traded to their division rival and city rival, the New York Knicks. What are you looking for out of Brooklyn this year?
At least they recouped some assets, though, right? I mean, they could have been just in the gutter after the Harden, Kyrie, KD stuff.
They got a great haul.
Credit to them for bringing back in some picks and finally choosing to go in this direction. It's been looming over their head for quite some time now. I think they're going to go 23-59. That's my official record prediction. It could be worse than that. They're out with Jacque Vaughn, in with Jordi Fernandez now as the head coach, and it's just a flawed roster. Like, there are guys that I like here. I like Nick Claxton. Like, honestly, dude, I like their entire starting five in different contexts. I like Dennis Schroeder as a role-playing point guard. I like Cam Thomas as a sixth man. I like Cam Johnson and DFS as rotation wings. I like Nick Claxton as a defensive big, but it's like these are all their starters. There's no star. There's no guy that's going to manufacture easy offense for anybody. And Nick Claxton's a good defensive big, but he's not the kind of like defensive anchor that is going to elevate you to being an elite defense. I think that's probably their strength. But there's only so high you can climb in terms of a defensive ceiling with a defensive backcourt of Dennis Schroeder and Cam Thomas. And so I think the spacing is probably going to be bad with Schroeder and Claxton and Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas is a good shooter of the basketball, but like he's way more of an isolation create for himself. So I think the offense is probably going to be ugly, and I don't think the defense is going to be that good. The one thing that cracks me up that I think we have to get out of the way, the Ben Simmons offseason workout tape is circulating once again, Carson. He's making his return. He's going to average 30 points, 10 boards, and 10 assists again this season, man. He's back. Over under 13 and a half games played for Ben Simmons.
That's a good line, dude. Also, here's the one thing that I will say about Simmons. He is the dude who literally nobody buys in when you see this like off-season training stuff. Like, oh my God, he's making jumpers. People hate Ben Simmons so much. I think it's gone much too far for a dude who ultimately just hasn't been available. Yes, dude, people hate Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
This is how I feel whenever there's somebody who everybody just lashes out on and makes the punching bag of the league. Like, everybody is going to hate Rudy Gobert. All right, can we appreciate what he does well? Everybody is going to hate Ben Simmons. Why? He doesn't even play.
I mean, Ben Simmons sucks. I mean, I think it's the fact that he got paid all this money and just isn't available.
So is it all resentment, Logan? Is it all about the bag? Is that what it's all about?
Well, I mean, I think it's the fact that he hasn't earned any of it. The fact that he got paid.
He had. He was damn good.
Well, I'm
Ben
not
Simmons
saying that
was
he didn't.
damn good, and then his body broke.
Well, I mean, are we sure it's just the body? Because a lot of it seems
his
like
mind is now broken too.
I was going to say, a lot of this seems like a mental component, and that's where I think people are just mad that Simmons doesn't have an incentive to play basketball anymore because he's gotten paid, and I think that's where it comes from. I agree. I think a component of it is his back issues and stuff like this, but I dislike Ben Simmons a lot. So, like, I'm not going to defend the guy. I don't like the guy either.
I don't like Ben Simmons. I don't expect him to have any impact, but I certainly don't hate him. I don't know. It's just weird to me that it's like he's still one of the biggest punching bags. It's like, guys, he's hardly an NBA player. The dude doesn't play. It's just a little bit much for me that, Shaq's still.
Well, I think
Shaq called
people
Rudy
are.
Gobert and Ben Simmons the two worst players in NBA history, which is just absurd. First of all, did you ever watch Darius Johnson Odom? There are other guys.
That's a crazy stray. I'm sorry, Darius.
I'm sorry too. Maybe he should have made a shot in the NBA. He literally didn't.
But honestly, dude, I can't help but I can't help but feel like Ben Simmons does this to himself.
I know.
Like,
I get it.
It's like, dude, just stop putting them out there. Stop teasing us and acting like you're gonna play this year. And when you do play, you're gonna put up 4 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists on 53% true shooting. It's just like I just wish Ben wouldn't. Don't even put anything out there, man. Go grind in silence and then play your 17 games or whatever it's gonna be this year.
Yeah, I get it. Although, who knows? Is he actually saying put this out there, or is some trainer just filming that stuff?
Who knows?
Publishing it?
I would actively tell if someone's dude. Please don't post this. Please just leave me out of it.
Yeah, the annoying thing, I guess, finally on Ben Simmons before we move on is just it feels like people have retroactively undone how good he was, which is crazy because at the time I was somebody who was like, guys, Ben Simmons is a little bit overrated because he's insanely limited in the half court. But now it's just like, oh, he sucks. He's always sucked. And we ignore the fact that he was one of the 3 to 4 best defenders on the planet for a time and an amazing transition player who always had his limitations, but was like clearly an all-star level dude, lived up to the #1 pick when he was healthy and mentally well, and now it's just cheap. It's just cheap to punch down on the guy, in my opinion. But anyways, the Nets are weird, man. They're weird. It feels like you don't see teams built like this anymore, where they just sort of have a hodgepodge of unimpressive veterans and they don't have any flagship young talent. Basically every team in the league in the NBA these days you look at and you say, okay, well, they're in a hard rebuild. These are the young dudes they're excited about, or they're trying to win now. And it's like, yeah, that's a legit playoff caliber roster. The Nets are not that. Unfortunately, there's no one who I'd be really excited about if I were a Nets fan. Cam Thomas is fun. I've been a huge Cam Thomas fan at times. When he was in the draft, when he got picked 27th, I said that he was the steal of the draft. I made a whole YouTube video on it because he was such a talented scoring prospect. But that's within the context of him being the 27th pick in the draft, right? I mean, most of the dudes who are picked that late, it's a success if they become capable rotation players. So Cam has overachieved where he was drafted. But as impressive as his scoring skill set is, and he's truly one of the craftiest scorers on the planet. I mean, he is a jittery mover. His ability to cover ground with his step back is absurd. Like, he is just constantly deceptive and crafty with his movements, and he's a tough shot maker, but he basically only takes tough shots. And one of his elite traits in college and early in his NBA career, when we just see him come in stints, was he was a foul drawing machine, but he didn't do that last year. He didn't get to the line at nearly the same rate. So at the end of the day, you got a guy who's scoring a couple points below league average true shooting in the on-ball play types, pick and roll isolation. He created with basically average efficiency. So yes, he can eat up volume as a scorer, and it's going to be fun to watch, but is he going to do it efficiently? No. Is he going to create easy stuff for himself even? No. And then he's a bad playmaker and a bad defender. So he can drop 50. He could easily have a 50 piece this year, but like, there's a reason the team was 7 points per 100 worse with him on the floor last year. The other Cam Johnson, I think just is who he is, and I think he's somebody who people got too high on. Like, he's been treated as this exciting young player. He turns 29 years old.
I was going to say, dude, I mean,
this dude
came out like in the draft. Like,
he was
what, 24?
47 when he came out of the draft. Yeah, he's actually been de-aging. And he's improved. He has consistently improved in the league. I want to give him props. He's an awesome shooter and a capable defender. And that's what he is. He's a fine pick and roll ball handler in small doses, but he's an average athlete. He's a below average ball handler. He's not a playmaker. Defensively, he's not quick enough to like really take on high level wings. He's not strong enough to guard really good fours. Like, he's just fine. And he's a really good shooter. He's a solid basketball player. He's not somebody who you should look at as like a future centerpiece, especially considering he's 62 years old. Simmons doesn't factor into things for me. I never even answered your over-under, 13.5. I'm going to take the over, but not by much.
I'll take the under. I'll take it.
All right. I'll say that he probably plays 20, But even in those 20, I just think he's broken. I think he's broken physically. I think he's broken mentally. He's not nearly the same defender. He's incapable as a scorer now. I just think it's over for him, unfortunately, as an impactful basketball player. You add Zaire Williams from Memphis. He's got solid playmaking feel for his size and his age, but because of limitations with his quickness and his strength, he gets forced into a lot of tough shots. A lot of times where he initiates a drive, but then he just can't get all the way downhill and he's forced to settle. And he's been a bad shooter in the league, dude. 30% from deep, 29% on all twos outside the restricted area. So I'm not feeling the young talent. When you're going to be as bad as the Nets are, you'd like to be optimistic about that. And I don't see anybody here who I look at and I say, yeah, that guy's a real building block.
Yeah, neither do I. And it sucks being in no man's land, man. It especially makes it worse when you're in no man's land with no real prospects to bank on. And there are young guys that like I like here a small amount. I like Dariq Whitehead out of the draft. I think he could carve himself out a role as a bench guard. I think Noah Clowney can get rotational minutes in the front court. Like, these are two guys that I think could be rotation guys, but there's nobody like Zaire Williams I liked coming out of the draft. Again, he could be a rotation guy, but there's nobody that screams this guy's going to be a stud to me. And I'm glad that they brought back Dennis Schroeder, because the little experiment where Cam Thomas had the ball in his hands a lot and was like almost a de facto point guard, that's just never going to work. Like, I like Cam Thomas. He's a lot of fun, like you said, but you need a guy that can actually, create offense for you. And Dennis Schroeder is just he's such a good veteran presence, to have at this time in his career where, yeah, he's going to make good decisions. He's going to move the rock. He's going to create downhill pressure. He's going to shoot, with decent efficiency. Like, Schroeder's a good stabilizer to have here, but that's the reality, man, is when you're a team like this with no real bankable talent, you got to bottom out at some point. And I think this is probably the year. So 23 might be a little bit low. It's not that low. I thought about going a little bit. I thought about going a little bit higher with them, but this feels right. Like, they have enough talent here where I don't think they're going to be at the cellar of the East. I think that's probably designated for the Wizards, but they're not going to be good. They're definitely not going to be good, and I think they're going to be a step down even from where they were last year, because at least you had Mikal Bridges, and I don't think Mikal Bridges is some superstar, but he's like a tier 2 kind of guy. There's nobody like that on this roster, man. This team is hot take. They're not going to be good.
No, they do have some solid vets, though. Like Claxton, he's only 25, so if you're talking about young guys, age-wise, he factors into those conversations. He's just so clearly what he is, and very established just as a high-level rim protector, a good rim finisher. He'll do his job. DFS can guard and hit 35% of his threes. We'll see if he remains on this roster. I think that he's a real trade candidate, because he's just going to be more valuable in another situation. They add Bojan. He'll hit 40% of his threes. He's a good offensive player. I know he looked bad in New York, but he's definitely better than he was in that stretch. He was actually quite an efficient pick-and-roll scorer and creator in Detroit in a dire offensive situation. So he's a guy who will bring offensive value. Schroeder brings point-of-attack defense and quickness and some playmaking and sometimes shooting, but overall he's always quite an inefficient scorer. You don't want him to be the dude running your offense. So you just look all around. Should be a below-average defense. They got some good personnel. I do think Schroeder's good at the point of attack. I do think Claxton will do his job. I do think DFS is a good wing defender. But then there's just some clear holes around those guys, and they're not going to be incentivized to, play their asses off. And then you got a bad offense. So one of the major things I'd be monitoring if I'm a Nets fan is just, how's Jordi Fernandez as a head coach? Highly regarded assistant. He could be a factor who motivates them to a few extra wins that maybe we aren't predicting. Ultimately, all of the outlook for this team should be about the future, right? You got 4 first-round picks this year. That's phenomenal. And then you have another 5 first incoming from other teams through 2031. And as you mentioned, you can see, is Dariq Whitehead a rotation guy? Is Noah Clowney a rotation guy? Clowney, mobile big, some floor spacing potential. Whitehead wasn't my favorite prospect, but he was a really awesome shooter. He couldn't get on the floor at all last year. And
he was also recovering from a little bit of an injury, too, from college.
True. So we'll see. I don't think he's a dude with a particularly high ceiling, but that shot alone should give him some value. So we'll see. It's not really about this year if you're the Nets. It's already looking forward to the draft sweepstakes, in my opinion, and hopefully having the right coach and building something from there.
Do you think if they do get offers for any of these guys, because I do think that's where the Nets season is a little bit more intriguing. If they get
Yes.
offers for some of these guys from other teams, do you think they should just bite the bullet and go ahead and let some of these vets walk for future assets?
Why not? I mean, who is the dude who you would hold on to? I think DFS, it's very likely that he gets moved just because he's in such a prototype that's valued around the league, especially, when he's shooting well because he's a damn good defender. And Claxton, I don't know. Like, I like Claxton. He's a dude who I would like to have on my team. I wouldn't be rushed to move off of him because of his age. And they paid him, actually, so they won't be able to trade him at least for a portion of the season. And I don't think that they will. If somebody came to me with a great offer, then yeah, I would consider it. But, they just committed 4 years, $100 million to him, and he's a relatively young player. So I think DFS is the guy. I don't know. Bojan's not really drawing a haul. Schroeder, not drawing a haul. I don't think people who are trying to contend will want him to be their starter. I think he's just, like a really good bench guard who brings in an influx of energy defensively and some quickness. It's really DFS who I'd be looking at if I'm the Nets.
Yeah, Claxton's kind of the only guy that I'd want to hold on to, just because I think Claxton, you'd need to really pull some assets together. But everybody else, I'd be willing to move off of, man. Like you said, this isn't the timeline, and it's sad, dude, because the Nets are. It's a tragedy, man. Their franchise history, going from the disaster that was the KG and Paul Pierce and Darren Williams teams to now. The Kyrie, KD, Harden era. They've got to find their identity, and it's going to be through the draft, man. I'm hopeful that the Nets can hit on some of these draft picks and get their superstar of the future, man.
Yeah. Tough division to compete in, man. You got a lot of the top dogs here right now, so this is a fun one to start the NBA season preview content with. Logan, I am just oozing with excitement, man. I'm so happy to just be talking about current basketball. Oh, I cannot wait. Football is amazing, but when they're both going on, just nothing beats it. So keep locked in, everybody. Stay dialed in. We've got more football content coming. Of course, Sunday we'll be back reacting to all of those games at night. We'll have Monday Night Football reactions, and we'll be bringing more NFL and NBA content throughout the next several months, of course, but especially leading up to the NBA season. You can find all of our content across all platforms. You can find all the full shows on YouTube. You can also find some of our video essays, video breakdowns. I did a video last week on the best defender ever for every NBA team. Logan did an awesome video breaking down Bo Nix's film, something we'd like to do more of. I thought Logan did a great job with it, so if you guys are interested in that sort of quarterback breakdown stuff, check that out on our YouTube channel. You can listen to the show across all audio platforms, wherever you get your pods. You can follow us across social, TikTok, Instagram, at NerdSesh, Twitter, at Nerd_Sesh, to see clips from the show, graphics from the show, and all of our short-form trivia contents. And you can join our Discord. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was NerdSesh.